Welcome back to a new summary season of Radio Juxtapoz, the podcast that lovingly explores the fringes of the contemporary art world to uncover hidden gems. As always, I'm Doug Gillen, and today I'm thrilled to have a one-on-one with the Irish artist known as Asbestos. Today's conversation is the first encounter I've ever actually had with Asbestos, the living actual person. But I did first come across his work about a decade ago when I was discovering the art world as a street art tour guide in East London. Just off a bustling brick lane, about 10-12 feet up on the side of an old brewery, there was a painted image of a man. The piece had been created using some sort of reclaimed material, and for about 3 years people often asked me if it was supposed to be Will Ferrell. Eventually I gave up trying to explain that it wasn't and just went along with it. And in the entirety of today's conversation, I completely forgot to bring that up. Anyway, the artist sitting with me in a mutual friend's garden studio in North London today has gone through many incarnations since those early days. He first dipped his toe into the world of street art by putting up conceptual lost posters. The moral high ground, perspective, and his mind would have been misplaced somewhere, and he was relying on the good-natured general public to help find them again. Today, he's more commonly associated with his socially engaged murals, highlighting issues such as Ireland's housing crisis, the loss felt throughout the COVID pandemic, and modern masculinity. The identity of the characters in his murals are often obscured with various masks, a topic we'll delve deeply into. However, it's largely his involvement in a recent documentary titled Don't Forget to Remember that brings us together today. Directed by Ross Killeen, the story centres around Asbestos' mother's diagnosis with Alzheimer's and the impact this has on him and his father. We spend a considerable portion of this conversation discussing that subject today.
I'm trying to remember. At times it comes back to me.
4 letters starting with L. Something's gone. It's a miss. Lost.
Losing your memory is like watching a bullet in slow-mo for years coming towards you and you can't avoid it.
The film itself is set for wider release later this year, but for now you'll have to catch it on the festival circuit to see it for yourself. We've got a lot of ground to cover today, so thank you for joining us on this journey. Let us know where you're listening in from, and let's dive into it right here, right now, with Asbestos on Radio Juxtapoz. Asbestos?
Hello.
Take one. Is that what I'm calling you?
Yes.
For the purposes of today?
Yeah.
How come?
What's the origin of it? Oh, you're getting in there early.
I guess it's two questions in that. You know, it was kind of a flippant casual start, but here we are. Why Asbestos? And why am I calling you Asbestos rather than your name? Is there a particular reason for that?
Well, yeah, I suppose coming from a street art background, everyone kind of comes up with their name. I've been doing this since the early 2000s, so over 20 years now at this stage. And what got me into it was a love of graffiti, like seeing like in a relation's house, like he had a mad collection of books, subway art. And I always kind of knew about graffiti, but didn't really get it. And then suddenly, like in the early 90s as a teenager, I was like, fuck, what is this? But then kind of was like, dabbled in it a little bit, but was kind of, I don't know if this is for me. Nothing to do with the illegality or the act of it. It's just like writing your name over and over again. I liked it and I really appreciate it, but it wasn't really giving me a buzz that I felt artistically I wanted.
Different kind of buzz,
exactly, yeah. And I absolutely obsessed with graph. Like I love it. Like I collect massive amounts of graph books, so it's more as a cultural thing. And then suddenly, like Worcester Collective was only like in its infancy.
R.I.P.
Yeah, R.I.P. Amazing thing. And they were only maybe up for maybe a month. And like Mark talked about how after 9/11 they were walking the dog around the city and then didn't know anything about street art. And then suddenly, as soon as they saw one thing, it was a Dan Witt's candles on the ground. Then they saw it everywhere. It's like the red car syndrome. And always stuck with me. And like, it was such a mad community. And then I was like, fucking hell, you Swoon, Bast, Brad Downey, all these people. I was like, yo, you can fucking do art on the street. And it wasn't even called street art. Nobody had a name for it then. I don't know who coining that term, but it was amazing, like just to know that. And then thinking of a name, bouncing things around, I thought about like the fact that the room we're in, if it was like here for ages, could have asbestos in it. It's latent, it's kind of unwoken. But as soon as you see it, it's going to really dramatically alter the way you react to it. And I like the idea of creating work that is maybe unobvious or slightly unnoticed and then just kind of hits you and gives a really visceral reaction. So that's the very art manky bullshit behind the name. Whenever anyone asks me that question, it's like, oh, the story's a little bit too long and it's a bit bullshit, but yeah, you get stuck with these names.
I've just watched Don't Forget to Remember.
Oh, great, thanks.
You know, really, really touching piece of film, really grabbed me. You know, there was a real rawness throughout, a vulnerability that you were allowing us as viewers to access. And I wondered, even through that vulnerability and you being so open, you were still kind of using that name. You still didn't kind of put yourself out there as...
Yeah, well, my name is mentioned in the film and I'm in the film. Like my anonymity is something I'm struggling with at the moment. Like even what we were talking about as we're setting up here, like it's the reason I'm anonymous isn't anything to do with it kind of came out a little bit out of street art, but actually extends more into the joy of being able to connect with somebody in a way that is quite deep and meaningful and vulnerable. And by removing my carapace of a white, English-speaking, middle-class, cis male with all of the kind of
inherent connotations that come with
that. I'm not denying any of those things and I'm aware of my privilege, but one thing that happens when you put a mask on is people visualize themselves within that space. And what it does is it creates conversation in which they feel that they have a role in it. And I really love that when you start talking about these things. So yes, in the film, I do appear and my parents refer to me by my first name and I go, Pete. So like, there you go. That's my name. But what it is the anonymity of my moniker and not using my face as much is that it gives me an opportunity to be really vulnerable, weirdly. Like there's a book called Face and Mask by Princeton Architectural Press. And it talks about a lot of kind of very heavy kind of psychological or intellectual discussion around what a mask is, like the masks and the persona comes from the Greek word masks, where personas are all these masks that we create. So in a conversation, even though you're seeing somebody's face, they're putting on an act of sorts, or they're creating their own world or their own personality, and they act in very different ways depending on who they're around. So even when you aren't wearing a mask, you're creating masks. And when you put on a mask, your world changes. Like people suddenly become quite liberated. There's a tradition in Ireland called the Wren Boys or the Straw Men, where they wear these straw kind of conical masks and they come around to your house at Christmas. It's more down in kind of the west of Ireland. And it's pocketed around Scotland. I think they're called mummers in Scotland. And
where's its origins?
It's Celtic, yeah. So it's in Wales as well, and it appears all around kind of Celtic world. But in Ireland, the Wren is on Stephen's Day after Christmas, for those who are not Irish. And
is there something that was part of your upbringing?
No, because it would have been the west of Ireland.
Where are you from?
Dublin. I'm born and bred in Dublin. Yeah. But then they wear these masks, and the idea of the mask is that they come play instruments, but they can almost create a world like the Piero or Harlequin or a jester, where they can mimic or they can take the piss out of people or they can joke in a way that you don't know who it is. The idea is you've no idea who's turned up to your house, and it creates this liberation. So like masks are weirdly liberating even though you're hiding your identity, and I love that fact that it means like any of the work that I do create around masks, weirdly people resonate more, I think, with their own personalities and feel that they have some input.
I want to talk more about the film in a minute, but since we're just here, I'm going to stay on this idea of masks. Masks have been quite a prominent theme for a while now.
Quite a while, yeah.
Not always.
No.
what does the muralism and street art give you through this exploration of masks? Because with this idea of masks, I feel like you could have gone in several different paths within art. Could go performance, could go more sculptural, could go down a couple of different avenues. But the main one that seems to kind of come out, or the one that I've seen or noticed more, is through the murals in the street. And I wonder what that gives you that maybe one of those other avenues.
Well, it's interesting you bring up all those things. We might talk about it later, but like sculptural and performance is actually somewhere where I'm moving to. And thinking about what the street means. The street is only one output, I think, that an artist can adapt. And I think there's an interesting kind of weirdness to the fact that we talk about street art and what is it, and lots of people have their definitions. I'm not really going to get into that, but it's a weird name for a form of art because it's defined by the area in which it's in rather than the style or the intent behind it.
Yeah, there's not a collective manifesto. There's not I can't say that they all use spray paint. Well, no,
so the street is one wonderful thing where you can make like the early stuff that I was making. There's actually a stencil here just in the studio, my mate's studio, Charlie, and
sorry, Charlie.
And it's an old stencil from 20 years ago. Jesus saves, like a goalie jumping. Yeah, you can make your mistakes on the street. So the opportunity to do work on the street and be out there and have people see the work and interact with it means you have to be a lot more visceral, a lot more immediate. You have to think about kind of what the environment is, and it's a wonderful space. It's wonderful painting on the street. When I'm getting reactions, people hating it and then suddenly going, oh, that's what you're painting. I was wondering what all those squiggles were. And yeah, it's a wonderful medium. It's a wonderful medium for people who are terrified about going into the kind of the halls of galleries. So that part of it really means that the putting that work out in the street, which I've been doing for maybe 7 or 8 years of like mural and masks, gives an opportunity for me to discuss things like what home means to you, what the COVID crisis, what mental health and male vulnerability means, and all of these things. By putting a mask on, the people looking at it don't feel that this is my story. They feel it's somebody playing a role that each of us have something in common with. And I love that. It's amazing that so many people, having space within art for people to jump into means they feel really part of it and they actually co-opt it.
Some of those bigger topics that you've talked about, I really like this idea of home particularly. And I feel like there's something that's often missing in this kind of current state of muralism, that we don't actually see people engaging with these themes and asking these big questions, and it kind of becomes so inherently decorative.
Well, it does, yeah, absolutely. But that's because we're seeing everything. Like we don't see every show in every gallery, but we see every wall in every city. So it's exposed that every type of street art is actually being served to the public. So I think that's kind of the wonderful thing about it, and it's also kind of the overwhelming thing as well. I think there are definitely people dealing with difficult topics, but it's the joy of the medium that there can be everything from something that's just purely decorative to cause driven to political to emotional to so many different things.
Have you noticed the change in reception since sort of trying to engage with those bigger themes? Definitely,
yeah. Like I think going back to kind of where I started, and as Asbestos, I was doing like stencils, I was doing posters, I was doing lost posters, I was doing these like little dolls. I was doing so many different things. Hadn't really found my voice, and kind of stopped doing it for about 5 or 6 years, and kind of the mid, probably around 2010 to 2015, probably just kind of dipped out of it because I felt I wasn't really saying anything. I was just kind of going through the motions and it wasn't giving me any buzz. And as I got back into it, it was actually Carlo McCormick is the reason I'm probably sitting here today.
Okay, go on. How?
Yeah, bizarrely. Carlo was doing a show in Dresden, which was this massive kind of show that had started off being kind of a optical illusion show, and then they brought him in and he went like, let's just bring in loads of other people. So it was like Martha was there, Brad Downey, Dan Witts, Ron English, Shep. It was like amazing lineup, absolutely astonishing lineup. But he wanted to do this journey from the initial days of graffiti through, so like traveling through a street scene in this massive old warehouse or airplane factory in Dresden. And he had seen my posters, even though I hadn't put up like many Lost posters in New York. He'd seen them or had registered them through Worcester Collective. I was like, I want that guy in there, because he was like, I was one of, he says, I don't think I was, but he was like one of the first people using postering kind of out of the world of kind of cost and revs, and there was plenty of people using it, but he just picked me as one of them.
Yeah, just for context, what was the Lost posters?
I was just doing these Lost stickers for like the last 20 years that are just random things that you lose that you wouldn't want to get back.
Kind of like the lost dog or the almost missing child.
Lost Polaroid photo of a dog last seen on a photocopier. Yeah. So ridiculous things to kind of play with the idea of what our consumerism and our obsession with objects and things is, and actually realizing they're not that important, and just then playing with humor so that you kind of mess with people's heads, and then they actually respond to you. And the joy of it wasn't putting the work up and posters and stickers, it was people emailing me. So I put my email address on and they just get random weird shit. Yeah. But Carlo saw this and he was like, I want that guy in the show. So I came over and did like this 6 meter long by 3 meter wall of just thousands of posters stuck on, and Carlo kind of went, by him wanting me there, I was just like, holy shit, like there's something there in what I'm doing, but I just haven't satisfied, so let's kind of dip back into this and work out what I want to do. And it was just, it reinvigorated kind of a spark in me that like, had come from that. And then just slowly this mask thing kind of came out. I don't really know where it came from. There's kind of some maybe thoughts of how it kind of came about, but yeah, I'm not really sure. But it was about kind of dealing with identity and about vulnerability was kind of the real reason I started.
I feel like that sense of the words that kind of circle when I'm thinking about your work is compassion and vulnerability.
Okay, thank you.
Those are the two things. I see that kind of sense of compassion and those wider issues, and that definitely that vulnerability that you shown in the film. And I was thinking about this, especially with you did the Idols collab with the bat, where I beat myself up, and these themes of kind of, I guess, masculinity at the heart of that's in there. And I was just on the way up, I was thinking about the connection, the deep connection that Ireland has with poetry, with these men expressing their feelings through the written word, and it's like world renowned. It's like world renowned, and it's like this kind of almost cliche of going, you turn on a TV show or a film, and the American tourists come into an Irish bar, and a man in the corner starts singing. It's like this deep connection with men and their feelings in Ireland, and I wonder what the reality of that experience is like, where you have this kind of idea, fucking Shane MacGowan, whoever it is that you want, poets, deep connection with poetry and men expressing their feelings, but actually the idea of what it is as a male expressing a sense of vulnerability or exploration into themselves in Ireland. I wonder if you could maybe sort of...
I'm not sure how much those poets actually did really dig deep into their own self.
It was about Ireland.
It was about lots of things. It was like Yeats talked about kind of myth and mythology in Ireland, and talked about kind of his love. And like you get poets talking about personal things, but I think Ireland, like so many countries around the world, had a repressed sense of masculinity. And like even looking at my parents' generation, you leave school, you get married, you have kids, there's a lot of responsibility to put on that. And it's only like through the film and through my mum's sickness that I've got a lot closer to my dad, and he's opened up and he talks about stuff, but that's a rarity, and it's slowly generations and intergenerational kind of experience that we are all programmed to have this facade of being strong, but true strength to me is actually being able to say you're terrified, you're weak, you're feeling shit. Like, and Joe Talbot, as you say, when we did that project about I Beat Myself Up, it was an amazing interview because he's gone through an awful lot of shit, and I don't know him personally, but what he was saying was quite inspiring. And
I think a lot of people can connect with what he says in that interview, where he talks about, and what he says in much of his kind of ethos. This is the lead singer of the band Idols, and it's all about his battles with addiction, kind of that permanent fight of climbing up the mountain, falling back down, and kind of that idea of it being a permanent battle?
What happens is you go over this edge where you're like, do you know what, I'm just going to let my head down. So you have a couple of beers and you relax, and then the next day you're slightly behind. Your body's behind, you heal it because you poison yourself. And that's when you start beating yourself up. Not like, oh, you're a terrible person, but you go, right, just have a couple of beers, get through this. And there's this slow, meandering thing where you're just constantly doing this, and it feels good.
Yeah, and like we went very viscerally on that. Like myself and my mate Stephen went over to Ross Killeen to do that project with Idols, and it was about, Lars wanted me to do a mural that was about male vulnerability, and there was another artist, Katrina, who was doing a piece about it was actually about kind of sexual assault within festival community. It was very visceral work. So
wow, yeah.
Both
right
pieces,
right in the eye of the storm on that one.
It was amazing, kind of how she dealt with that, and then talking to Joe about male vulnerability. But what we did was we got, for anyone who hasn't seen it, I made piñata masks to put over my head.
Before Kendrick did this.
And did Kendrick do it? No, I haven't seen it.
So in his Not Like Us video.
Okay, amazing.
For the new one, he's got a it's a kind of nod to Drake.
Oh, amazing. Brilliant. Yeah, I'll have to look that up. So we filled it full of sweets, and then brought these in, and like I emailed like Joe's, the Idols management, and went, yeah, I want to get Joe to come around. I want to put a piñata on his head full of sweets, and I want him to smash it off with a baseball bat. And they were like, oh yeah, Joe wants to do this. I was like, fucking hell. Yeah. You may not get to the performance later, but yeah, he bloody well fucking went at it. Yeah. Like I did it first just to kind of show him what I was thinking of kind of from a performance point of view, and started smashing it. And like I put in some kind of padding inside so that you weren't just literally smashing yourself in the face. And I thought I was going at it, but fucking hell, he went mental with it. I was like, okay, is he going to be okay? But yeah, he spoke so eloquently about masculinity and about how vulnerability becomes, I think, I was about to say a superpower. I don't think it is a superpower. That's the wrong word. It becomes something that gives you so much strength and so much confidence by the ability of my friends and close friends just talking about things that you think you're terrified to talk about. And as soon as you open up about it, whether it's about stuff in your sex life, your relationships, your relationship with your family, your work, your sense of self, and you talk about these things, and so everyone is like, I fucking feel the same. Yeah. Like everyone does. But like just having that chink of being able to open up that conversation is really important for artists. And I'm not the only one doing it. I'm not even scratching the surface. I think there's loads more to scratch, but yeah, it's very rewarding, and I think Joe was wonderful to get involved in that.
I remember throughout the pregnancy period of my recent daughter coming into the world, and even now, the differences between my experience and her mother's experience was just so laid out.
Okay,
within just throughout the entire process, from right at the start. She had networks around her. She had groups, WhatsApps. She had people that she was talking to for this, and this.
Amazing.
And she had this really just naturally inbuilt social structure. And then I think that this is maybe something that other people will have experienced, or the men will have experienced, where I was just out on my own.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm going here. And then if I meet up with a friend, it's like, oh yeah, we're having a baby. Oh, okay. Yeah. Great. Like, what's next?
But did you find that occasionally if the conversation opened up a bit more, and then suddenly people were jumping in?
What you were saying about as soon as you show your vulnerability, then it allows it's an access point for other men
to feel avalanche
to suddenly go.
It all starts coming out.
Okay, cool. The gate's open, and it's kind of like, I think that's probably what a lot of girlfriends experience, or partners, when their man gets pissed, and then suddenly the floodgates open, and it's all about that. It's like these ideas of just completely, just really fundamentally not wired to be able to deal with their emotions and how to handle these things.
Yeah, like I did therapy last year. Started it, was last year, the year before, and it was just kind of, it was slightly unprompted. I was talking to somebody in the film industry randomly on a road trip, and she was just saying how much she'd got from therapy, and I was like, you know what, fuck it, I feel actually in a pretty good place. Maybe that's a good time to do it. And it took a long time to kind of scratch away what was kind of deep seated, but there was an awful lot of things of kind of trauma that were maybe not. Actually, I won't use the word trauma because they weren't traumas. They were just kind of inbuilt parts of my personality that I related to my dad, related to my brother, to my mum, and how I could see kind of my mum's anxiety and my dad's kind of stoicism and different things in them that were coming out. And what was wonderful about going through therapy, and I stopped it a while back, but I'll definitely go back to it, was when there was something really, really intense that I needed to talk about, I'd go in and that would be maybe 2 minutes of it, and then suddenly you just go off on another tangent and realise, oh shit, that's actually more important to talk about. Like, the immediate problems are not necessarily that bad, but digging back into kind of the past. And like in the film, I don't know if you picked up on it, we kind of talk about it quite ambiguously, but my mum walked past a car bomb in Dublin. But my mum walked past on her way home. My brother was in the pram 46 days before I was born. And the car bomb went off about 2 minutes after. She was putting her key in the door in the flat they lived in the city centre above the pub.
All the explosions were caused by car bombs so familiar to people north of the border. There was no way they could have been placed without the intention to kill innocent bystanders. The 3 in Dublin exploded almost simultaneously, so there was no possibility of them not being planned to go off at peak rush hour. The bomb in Monaghan went off an hour later and just as deadly.
And like 2 minutes earlier, if she'd been there, she was supposed to pick a parcel up. So she would have been 2 minutes and we'd be dead. I wouldn't be sitting here. You'd be sitting in this room on your own wondering why you're here. But talking to her about that, like, she definitely suffered a fear and a trauma after that. And I will use trauma because I think it deeply affected her.
I think that feels like, I think you were right to kind of like, just kind of like check yourself a little bit on that, you know, because I feel like that's a word that gets used. It's almost void of meaning because it's so casually used by people. And I think a car bomb and a near-death experience is definitely a valid time.
It is, but people internalise that. Like what we're talking about, men not talking about things, people in the 70s didn't talk about stuff. Like, she was just like, oh, well, I wasn't killed, everything's fine.
Off we go.
And then that led to her just being nervous about stuff but she was mid-20s, getting married, having kids, the tension of all those things. Like, you're living in your parents' house and suddenly you're given away by your father. Like, even the term being given away, walked up the aisle, is just is bizarre. And then in Ireland, when you got married at that stage, if you worked as a government job, you had to give up your job. Like, your rights were diminished as a human being by getting married in the 70s. And like, it's just shocking to think of how I look back at her, and I started exploring this as her Alzheimer's developed, which the film is about.
We eked that one out there. It's taken us half an hour to...
But yeah, absolutely. Like, it was like thinking about kind of who was she when she was 18, 19? What were her hopes and dreams? She was a dressmaker. What did her ambitions want to be? And I never really found that out, and I can't now.
You didn't find that out? You didn't? So there was a lot of that stuff about her past that you genuinely just...
I can't.
You were only
now
asking the questions.
Well, I would have asked little bits and pieces, but in families, you just assume things and you don't have the conversations, and people assume that you know things.
Especially as sons, right, or daughters. It takes a long time until you start separating your mother from that role.
That's a really good point. Yeah, absolutely. How seeing them as an individual.
Who are you?
I now see my dad as an individual, not my dad. He is still obviously my dad, but he has that role, but I now have conversations that I can talk to him in a way that's more as a one-to-one, and that took a long fucking time. And it only happened because of not because of the film, but because of my mum's Alzheimer's, which started maybe about 6 years ago, and the film developed out of that and developed out of a conversation with myself and the filmmaker, and his mum, Ross Killeen, who's the director, had passed away a few years ago from dementia. So that shared experience started a conversation with us. There's so many conversations I'd love to have, and so many things that I just would love to have found out about her.
You're bigger than the mountain, Matt.
As this layer of worry has lifted off. But is it her anymore?
When did you? Let's start. The simplest question, a polite question to ask, even though I kind of probably might already know the answer. How is your mother at the moment?
Thank you. She's in a good space in that she isn't distressed, which a lot of people with Alzheimer's or dementia are. She's very kind of, her memory disappears in seconds. My dad basically has Alzheimer's by proxy.
What do you mean by that?
Because he's a carer. The person who has Alzheimer's forgets that they have Alzheimer's, or they remember it, but it can be very distressing for some people and they can get violent, but for other people it's kind of, they're almost in this stasis as if they're kind of waking up and watching a film and then falling asleep again. And so for my dad, is kind of by proxy is the person who's the caregiver, who's looking after her, who's the person suffering more because he can't forget. So she's in a better place, and eventually we'll have to probably she'll probably have to go into care.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was part of the film. There was that really, really raw, intimate moment where you're actually in the doctor's surgery, the doctor's doing the consultation, doing those tests. I mean, that's like, when I talk about intimate and vulnerable, like that's as vulnerable, like that space, a doctor's room.
That's more than me though. Like that's Ross as well, and everyone working on the film. It takes a village in these ways. Like we worked as a small team, but like he worked at how we get this intimate story of a family. And there are other documentaries and films and things about Alzheimer's, but how could we do something that was personal to us, but also had a little bit of levity, a bit of humor, a bit of the occasional laugh. It was a love story about my parents and about the family. But it came out of, to just take a step back, kind of the genesis of it. I did a show in the Hugh Lane Gallery, which is amazing kind of modern art gallery where the Francis Bacon studio is in Dublin.
He's one of your boys, isn't he?
He's one, born here.
Defected though.
Born in Dublin, yeah. But he... I did a project with the Hugh Lane on a Collins Street, the main street, which is around COVID. I did this like 6-7 story figure made of matches, and each match was a person who died of COVID. So drew 4,989 matches. And it was linked to Joseph Beuys' exhibition, who I'm obsessed with. He's like just a constant in my art. This is a really roundabout, I'll try and be quick.
It's a podcast, mate. We can go as long as you want.
He did a lecture in Dublin in 1974, 2 months after the Dublin Modern bombings, and he knew an awful lot about Northern Ireland and the conflict and the Celtic world. He was really obsessed with Dublin, loved James Joyce, came and visited, was supposed to set up a free university in Dublin for Europe that fell through. But he did these lecture series where he had blackboards in the room wherever he was doing the lecture. And he would just write on these for hours and hours and hours and rub stuff out and write and rub stuff out and do drawings and like. But in Dublin,
was that a direct connection with?
Completely. So
we'll get to that.
He did one in Hugh Lane, he did one in Limerick, one in Galway or in Cork, I think. But only in Dublin they held onto the blackboards from a school around the corner, and they kept them and then they displayed them. There was all this controversy in the press going, "This isn't art." But I was obsessed with them because, to me, it's the very last moment of a lecture. You haven't heard any of the rest of the lecture. You haven't heard any of this, but you're just seeing, as if you just watched the last 3 seconds of a film or read the last page of a book. And I love the fact that I don't know what's going on, and just the marks and the beauty of this weirdness and his work. So I did a show, a one-night show during Culture Night, where I drew chalk drawings on blackboards based on his boards, exact same size, and there were 3 drawings of around my mum's memories. And then I invited people to come into this white cube with a duster and a piece of chalk, and I stood in the middle of the room with a mask on of a mirror, so making them look back at themselves. And in the corner there was a record player playing a loop of Joseph Beuys laughing continuously.
How does that create what kind of environment does that create?
I wanted people to feel really uncomfortable.
That's unsettling, right?
Because the whole idea about street, and this goes back to street art. Street art is this ephemeral thing, and you see people like putting a plastic over a Banksy. Like, it's supposed to be destroyed. It's destructive art. It's there. It's ephemeral. It's supposed to be painted over. in the early days of like Barcelona graffiti, somebody would paint a mural, they'd get the photo, and then somebody would start painting immediately. So that ephemeral nature, I wanted people to be in a white cube in a very obvious gallery space, but then have the opportunity to destroy the work. It was called Erase My Memories. So I was watching them erasing my memories because I still have them. I can't destroy my memories.
Was this after
This was before. This was the genesis.
This was before your mum's diagnosis?
No, sorry. This was after her diagnosis, but before we started the film. And one of the first people to come in was Ross Killeen, who's the director, and he came in and he didn't want to destroy anything. So up in the top right-hand left-hand corner of one of the boards, relating to his mum, he was very emotional about it. He just wrote, "Don't forget to remember." And funnily enough, the next person who came in rubbed it out, which I thought was brilliant. But we started a conversation. I was like, I have all this footage. None of it's in the film from that exhibition. But of all this footage, I'd feel I'm not going to make just one of those 3-minute films that I usually make after a project, which are grand and everything, but they're not a narrative. They're not a...
Well, they don't give you a chance to dig into something.
No.
If you're doing something as personal as this, I think you want to open that space up.
Completely. And he then rang me a few weeks later and said there's funding coming up for Real Arts, the Arts Council fund for artistic films. Let's go for it. And within 2 weeks we had funding, and a month later we were starting filming. It was just happened so quickly. And it's, we then had to kind of create this story about the destruction of memories, creating all of these blackboards, but like finding out the story of my family and him filming my mum and dad doing crosswords and looking back at where they met and intertwining these stories of my art, their relationship, their upbringing, and then her dementia, and kind of kind of building memories. And then in the film I make 12, I think it is, blackboards of our family photos. So like we all have family photos at home. Less so now, we have our phones.
Yeah,
but
this
we don't.
Is something I'm actually just. I'm currently back. Like my daughter's a year and a half, and I'm like, why don't I have like books of physical photos of
print
her?
them out, or get a Polaroid, or but it's easy to say, but we don't do it.
No.
And so just drew all these blackboards, and at the end of the film, spoiler alert, I put them on the street for people or the elements to destroy, and it's about. People attaching like the photo being the important thing. It's actually not. It's asking the question about what was happening then, and like you going back through your parents' photos and going, oh, and then I'm like, no, that was before we were married, or that was the holiday we went. My parents went to Ibiza on their bloody honeymoon. Yeah, and it's just there's so many things you're like, holy shit, that's amazing. Yeah. So the film is. Did you learn a lot about them? Shitload.
Is there one experience from that kind of stands out?
Actually, I'm not sure if there's one experience. There probably is, but I think just the fact of being around my folks in the context of making something like that, and filming is a slow process. So you're talking about stuff, and I think actually, the one moment was going back to the house that my mum grew up in South Lots Road. And just off South Lots Road, and
she had no idea.
She couldn't remember the house, and we went inside. Nikki, who lives there, brought us in, and she kind of got a little bit distressed, but she was looking around, going, "Where is this?" Couldn't remember her own bedroom. But when she was walking up to it, as I was parking the car, the film crew were there, and she was like, "Oh, the shop in the corner, that was Mrs. whatever her name is. She used to run that." And then we're standing there, and then literally they ran a shop in the ground floor that my grandmother ran. And across the road there was a post office, and she was like, "Oh, the family across the road." She remembered all these things. I was like, "You don't remember your own house, but you remember these people.
But you remember these pieces."
Yeah. So like that was it was a wonderful day, because it was a different thing. So the film was it was wonderful working with Ross and Louise and Narian, DOP, and Graham, the sound man, and everyone has a story. So like you're suddenly in this process and you start talking to people and they're like, fuck.
What were some of the interactions on the street when you were doing that chalkboard?
They're wonderful. Aspect? Yeah, people were just baffled because people don't like the idea of destroying things.
Most people.
Yeah. Well, they feel it should be preserved, and they're right in some ways. But also, if you want it to be destroyed and you're asking them to, they feel really nervous, and it makes them rethink what the idea of art on the street or the idea of what art really is. People's reaction was telling me stories about their family, their grandmothers, telling me stories about their lived experience or writing names down on it. It was a wonderful interaction, and every time you speak to somebody, they have somebody they know who has dementia or Alzheimer's, and to me, that's the power of.
What's the difference between those two?
That is a good question. So my mum has vascular dementia, which affects the blood vessels in her brain, but I think Alzheimer's is the condition, whereas dementia is the symptom, if I'm right. Don't take my word for it. You've asked me a question I'm not 100% sure of.
Okay. Unfortunately, Radio Juxtapoz doesn't quite have that Joe Rogan budget where they can just have some guy pull it up. I have gone on to alzheimers.org, which has stated, dementia is a general term for a decline in mental ability severe enough to interfere with daily life, while Alzheimer's is a specific disease. Alzheimer's is the most common cause of dementia. And so with that, and this is either, I don't know if I'm reaching here, do you think that there would be a connection between that traumatic moment of the bomb going off and the condition?
I've no idea. You'd need to ask a specialist on this. I would say probably not. I think there's various reasons why it happens. It can be, there's lots of different reasons, and the older we all get, like if we keep living longer and longer and longer, we have the chances of getting it get higher and higher and higher. You will eventually get dementia or Alzheimer's if you live long enough. Like it is ultimately inevitable if you lived like 120 or 100, but some people get it a lot later than others. Because the brain I heard scientists talking about this, and they're basically saying pretty much everyone will probably get it.
Because the physical...
We're living way past the time that we were kind of ever supposed to live past.
So our physical condition is evolving faster than our brain is keeping up.
Yeah, and like even early onset dementia is now becoming more of an issue as well. So that to me is kind of what's really interesting around making the film, but also making the work on the street and about talking about these things to the public. And I think there's I love the fact that the film is now somebody else's. My murals are other people's now. Mm-hmm. And like even down in Cork, the What Is Home mural around housing, a local charity just started using that box head image as their symbol, and there were like 200 of them walking around the streets with box heads and cardboard writing protest.
Did they ask for permission to do that?
They kind of did, and they kind of didn't, and I didn't care. I didn't.
Because like a local charity doing it's one thing if that was Coca-Cola.
Oh no, it was a charity. It was all about the housing issue. No, they asked me permission, but I kind of went, you know what? I'm glad you asked me permission, but I wouldn't have been annoyed if they hadn't. I would have just gone, it would have been nice to have been asked. But I felt I'm coming into their city, drawing a big, massive mural, imposing this on them.
It's great to see how that identity and that ownership can be reclaimed by different organisations.
And I think that's the wonderful thing about kind of the interaction of street art is how people can feel really part of it and feel that's part of me, now part of my life when walking to work, and can co-opt it. And I think the same with the film, people can share this, and hopefully as many people can see it to have conversations. It's a difficult ask to get somebody to go on a Friday night to see a film about Alzheimer's, but I think when people see it, they see that it's a bit more nuanced around a love story with my mum and dad, and
especially
there's a lot of humour,
because people think with something like that they're like, oh fuck, this is going to make me feel sad, isn't it? There's going to be a sad
moments
film.
There, yeah.
But it's done in a way that it doesn't take that baseball bat and beat you up over the head with
Ross
it.
Was very, very adamant about that, about how we have to find levity and hope in this.
It's not like over the top, blown out emotive moments of, like, here's your sad pianos and your violins and all that stuff. It feels, it's a very quick hour. It is quick, as poetic and as beautiful as it is.
Yeah, we didn't feel like it's nearly 80 minutes, just a bit longer than the hour, and we felt we could have made it longer, but that's what it needed to be. Like, I think that's the wonderful thing about film. You can make it as long and short as you want, and it's such a different medium that I've never worked in. Like, being able to, as an artist, to collaborate and make a feature is just kind of a bit mind-blowing. but I love that about the opportunities of what you can do on the street and in galleries and art today. Like, you just go onto YouTube and you find out how to do something. Like, I bought a sewing machine. I've never used one. My girlfriend Jo was just showing me how to use it last week on a costume, and you can just Google something and find out how the hell to do it.
Be an expert in 20 minutes.
But I listened to an interview of Grayson Perry on, I think it was This Cultural Life, and I don't know who the interview was, or podcast, and he was talking about, he was like, I didn't know how to make pots when I was starting out. I just went to like an evening course, and then within a few days I was making them. And then I was the guy that had been making pots for like 20 years. I was selling them for like 5 times the amount, but mine were terrible.
Yeah.
But he was like, very much like, don't try and spend 10 years trying to work out how to do it. Just do it. And that's what's fucking great about street art. You're out there and you're making a tit of yourself in the street, and you're going, that's awful. Like, there's a number of stressful days I have, and I'm looking at a mural and I'm going, oh, that is terrible. I really hate this. And then you turn a corner and then you've got this buzz. Like, I was on a cherry picker the last day painting the What Is Home mural in Cork, and 5 a.m, bright sunny September morning, sun coming up, a crow landed on the crane, on the lift, listening to some amazing music. I was finishing off the last pieces and I just broke out in tears. It's like, this is just bliss. There was no one around. The sun was shining in my face. I was like, people were like looking up and shouting at me. It was kind of surreal. I kind of felt, this isn't real. Like, this is almost like a massively shit cliche that you'd see in a film and go, that'd never happen. But it was just the joy of like being able to interact with that. But then the terror the night before of going, oh, look, this is awful. So like, yeah, you put the work out there and you have to accept the fear. Like, you put a work into a gallery, not everyone's going to see it, or it doesn't leave the studio.
Yeah. I mean, I think for a lot of, I guess, freelancers or independent creatives, I don't know what the going term is, but it's that permanent battle of, how do I stop that fear building up? Like, that whole, it's really, really easy for that, what the fuck am I doing with my life, to build up. And I mean, I got it at the start. I still get it now. It's it's like omnipresent. I thought it would have quelled a little bit, but it's just permanently there, because you are always faced with that, like, okay, there's no safety nets here. Oh, if I don't do this, what the fuck do I do? Yeah. Well, your background is in journalism, is it? Or no. There's an artist, or no. I guess film. I've worked
amazing. Yeah,
worked in TV for a few years. Worked with Charlie at the advertising agency for a while, and I think that is part of the battle that keeps you going. And it is those moments where you are standing on a lift and the sun's coming up and the crow's at the end of the cherry picker, and you're just suddenly overwhelmed with something that even if it's just for a minute, calms that storm. And just says, hey, this isn't something you would get in another field.
Turning the microphone onto you, in that context, I had a conversation with a friend of mine about, like, who is happiest? Is it the guy or the woman who has 2.4 kids, the house in suburbs, goes for pints on a Friday, has their holiday every year? Or is it
pretty good.
Exactly. Or is it the artist who's struggling with all these kind of big questions? And he had this conversation with some friend of his and they were completely disagreeing.
Yeah.
But you know what? Like, the act of being an artist, about questioning what is happening in life, is a frivolous thing in some ways. Like, art isn't necessarily going to solve the world's problems. It often just reflects the issues that are happening out there. Yeah. And by suddenly challenging yourself to do that, you're opening up a can of worms that can be very difficult and emotional, and you can rack your brains about it, and you're there all night. You're is this shit? Is it anyone going to connect with it? Is it? Well, the other side is, are they going to understand it, or is it just so fucking obvious that you're just being a cliche?
Yeah.
And you rack your brains with these things. So, like, I think there's actually kind of, I literally do not want any tears or any boo-hoos about, like, the starving artist in the garage, but I don't believe in that. I think that's kind of a made-up bullshit thing.
Who doesn't believe that? The starving artist.
I don't believe it myself.
You
In
don't
that, as in, there is starving artists.
What do you mean by that?
Idea of like, oh, woe be me, I'm this artist in the garret, kind of suffering.
I mean,
from
it's
my dreams.
one of the oldest cliches.
It is a cliche, but I actually think
the world, right?
artists are happy. But it, and I don't want to kind of say.
But we want the public who aren't involved in art, and actually the ones that are involved in, they love a tortured soul. They love a Francis Bacon. They love a Caravaggio.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. Like, there's a lot of people going through very difficult, stressful things in their lives. Being an artist is stressful, but it's a different type of stress, and it's not necessarily that bad. It's a wonderful life to have. But you do bring on lots of questions that you have to confront, and I think that can be difficult, but it's also incredibly rewarding. And I think the cliche of kind of the starving artist in the garret kind of comes out of, if you look kind of going back to like Renaissance, they came from craftspeople to turning into what was considered trade to an artist, and then the whole artist. But if you look at the people who were actually artists, they were rich. And I was about to say mostly men, but actually there were an awful lot more women that were just never written into history because they were rich enough that they could become artists. Like, there's amazing Irish artists who at the turn of the century, Sarah Purser, Mamie Jellett, Evie Hone, amazing artists, but they were kind of written out of history for a long time and are now getting retrospectively acknowledged. But that impression of the artist was basically because it was mostly just kind of rich people being able to indulge their kind of fantasies. And I think now more people can get into art in so many ways, especially with Instagram, with being able to put work on the street, that it is more egalitarian. But it's also flipping back as well, because it's very difficult to be an artist. So now
there's so many.
There's so many, but also like just trying to survive and sell work means that actually it's kind of like in film and in actors, in art, in any form of creativity, you kind of need a little bit of funding behind you. And it's kind of now flipping back a little bit.
The class discussion in art is definitely something that I think is underexplored, especially as these conversations of representation, diversity have started in more recent years, post George Floyd, post Me Too, have suddenly become in the forefront of everyone's consciousness. But class seems to continue to be that thing that people don't. And you can have as many people of color, as many women at the front of your project, and anything like that. But unless you have the real class discussions, then you're only looking at one aspect of it.
There's so many of those kind of diversity issues. I think the first to kind of come out was less so class. It was like Rachel Whiteread was the first artist to win the Turner Prize in 1996, I think it was. Marina Abramovich was the first artist show in the Royal Academy last year. That's fucking unbelievable that a woman has never shown as a major exhibition in the Royal Academy. She was the first artist of female art. Yes. That is...
How old is that? How old is that institution?
Exactly. Exactly.
Fuck.
So, like, great women artists.
That's nuts.
Yeah, great women artists breaking through. Like, if you look in colleges now, there's so many young female artists, and it's still fucking difficult for them. It's still really hard.
Yeah.
So, like, the privilege I have as a male artist, I have to check myself and go, you know what? As things change, it's a ship that is righting itself, and more artists, more female artists, more diverse artists, more artists from different classes, more artists from different backgrounds. It's so fucking important because there's only been one story told for an awful long time, and that's white Western male art.
Ours.
And ours. And I'm part of that problem as well, so I'm deeply aware of that. Like, it's part of the reason I kind of cover myself up is not out of shame. It's actually to almost try and destroy that element and try and break that down and go, who's underneath this? And if I'm less successful because diversity in the art world happens, well then that has to happen, because it's a tilted ship that has been so fucked for everyone apart from a small minority that the best art wasn't being made. The best male art was being shown. And like, if you look at, say, the great exhibition now in Hugh Lane in Dublin for Sarah Purser, who was around with all of the Impressionists in the early 20th century, was mates with all of them in Paris. Maney Jellett and Evie Hone. Like the Maney Jellett painting in the National Gallery is my favourite work in Dublin. It's like she called it, I think it's called decoration, because when it was put into the RDS exhibition at the turn of the century, people just dismissed it as decoration, so she called it decoration. Eileen Gray, the designer who was around like Corbusier and making furniture, who was like way better than most of them. Like these people were vanguards, and it's taken so long. So street art is one of those worlds that comes from graffiti, and you know more than anyone else. Like the number of men in graffiti is just it's just fucking sausage fest, and even in street art, it's
street art's got a huge problem. I've spent the whole summer, the last couple of summers, the last like 8 summers, I'll go to all these festivals and I'll do all these projects, and especially now post COVID, post Me Too, post George Floyd, post BLM, if you don't have access to as many, artists of color that aren't there doing murals, why is your crew all white? Why is your crew all middle class? All these other aspects of the production need to be looked at. And it's one thing if you're doing it in a place which is small, regional, really actually is like demographically made up of people of X.
So yeah, but we're also two men talking about this, and it's not our lived experience. So I feel kind of nervous about talking about this because, you know what, I don't want it to be lip service. But the overriding feeling about this is it's about that, but it's also, I think, the space of street art that's given me so much opportunity is a space that anyone can enter and any kid can put stuff out. But I think the world of street art has become a world of mural painting now, and there's very little kind of there's still a few artists around Dublin that are doing fun stuff. Mm-hmm. But I'd love to see kind of a next wave of people, and there probably are, but I don't know about them, going out and just fucking shit up around and putting up smaller work.
But this, right, so there's a couple of things in there that I want to touch on. Right, the smaller work is what we would call street art, right? Something human scale, something that is ephemeral. Like if we separate street art and muralism, right? So if we say that street art is something which is inherently more accessible and more open than muralism. If I look at a mural, if I look at one of your pieces, I look at that, I take a lot away from it, but I'll never look at that and think I could do that. If I look at a sticker, a poster, an idea, something like that, I look at something on a stencil. I'll look at a stencil and think, that's something I could physically go out. Look, that's a piece of cardboard, a little bit of spray paint, and fucking 20 minutes. It's accessible.
The joy of it as well is like I've travelled over the last 20 years, and what's really good fun, like that's why I kept doing the law stuff, was like you just fill a bag with loads of stickers and you go out and you wander the city streets and you meet people and you're up at weird hours and you're doing all of this. And I think encouraging people to go out and do that and like feel as if their city is breathing, and it's kind of like, I'm sure you feel it as well, like you get a bit disillusioned by the world of kind of even defining what street art is or graffiti. And like graffiti is to me a very different thing. It's about an act of destruction, and it's about bombing trains, and it's just it's its own wonderful community. But the world of street art has now become a career for people, which is amazing that people can do that. And I don't want to harp back to be one of these kind of middle-aged men talking about, it was great years ago.
Back in the old days.
Well, people weren't able to make a living out of it. Now they are. So the next generation that's going to come up is really going to, it's really exciting to think what's going to come next.
My kind of final thought on that idea of how accessible, how if street art is something that's inherently accessible, open for all, I should be able to look at it and think I could do that, right? Graffiti wasn't just white guys. You know, you go to these inner city places, it was a direct reflection of the people from those neighborhoods. They were Latino, they were black, they were punks, they were hip hop kids, they were totally broad. Granted, 90% male, but they were all like, ethnically diverse. If street art is supposed to be more accessible than graffiti, why is it, how is it that it's so predominantly white?
I don't know, yeah.
Is it because we've gatekept it so much that we've made it only cool for white people? Has it been shut off from other people? Like, after all this, something as a direct response which requires no
access point. You don't need to fucking get permission from gallery owners. You don't have to do anything else. Record labels. Why is it that something as raw as street art is still, majority of it is being done by white people?
I don't know. I don't know, and I don't do as much street art as I used to. I do it sporadically. My work is kind of heading in a different direction now. There's definitely still street work in there, but also kind of even calling myself a street artist, I just see myself as an artist and who happens to do work on the street. I don't know the answer to that, and I think it's inherent, I think, on artists to also kind of give back and find a way of helping with that and finding a way to encourage that. And I suppose like with festivals,
well, this is where it kind of goes into festivals play a role in this, because they become this new part of this ecosystem. There's this industry that's now built in where most major cities in Europe and the US, by the way, when I say that most street artists at the moment are white, it's more, this is definitely a reference to my experience in the UK and Europe. I think US is different, and actually, I think I do see way more black muralists, black street artists. But here in somewhere like London, it's like such a small minority of people of color that are coming through and actually doing things in the UK. Like, so festivals have this role within this ecosystem where if the artists aren't there, so let's say they have, a smaller pool of artists that can come through and participate in the festival. Well, they play a role in encouraging and creating that next generation that you're talking about to come in and say, hey, look, come in and fuck up your city. Come in and do this. Doesn't have to be a big mural. Come in and do a stencil. And if you're good, we've got a home for you. We come and work in the production, and we'll fucking give you some tools, and we'll do this. Like, but after 10 years of this muralism festival circuit blowing up, why are we not seeing that manifest into a new generation of artists coming through?
Well, when I was starting out, like, to me, there was like one of the first artists I ever saw was Swoon. And like listening to her interview on Radio Juxtapoz, and her talking about that kind of her fear of kind of going out in the streets. But yeah, I think there were definitely some female artists, but I think that early day of kind of street art was very directly coming from graffiti, but it was also coming from a space of gallery spaces not being open to anyone. Like, you left art college and your final year show was seen by galleries. They picked you, and if they didn't pick you, you were fucked. To me, street art is actually kind of a weird thing, that it is more related probably to art college than it is to, it's kind of a mix of art college and graph, in that it's a space where people suddenly go, you know what, can't get into a gallery, I'm just going to put my art in the street. Like, going to the early
go in the back door.
Yeah, the Finders Keepers shows in the early 2000s were amazing, where people would just turn up on the street and everyone would put their work up, and then you could just run away with what you wanted at the end of the night. It was just a wonderful buzz before people kind of monetized it. And I think, like, there's a funny moment in the film where my mum and dad are talking about me getting into street art and graffiti, and it's like...
On the bench,
yeah, it's very embarrassing.
What was the significance of the bench? Was that a bench that you used?
They go for walks there all the time, okay. So it's just near my parents' house, and
location.
They're chatting away about it, and they're like, "Yeah, my dad's like, but it wasn't really graffiti. He was just like finding stuff in skips, and he was just painting on them and putting it on the wall. So it wasn't really vandalism. It's hilarious the way that it's justified.
Well, because that's probably a great reflection of actually what a lot of people of that generation think.
But even my mum and dad are now proud of that stuff. But like, when like my mum kind of was kind of like, "Why, you can't do that?" And I was like, "Well, I am," but like, it was just like getting her head around that, but also kind of getting her head around like her ambitions for me, and kind of going, is there a future in this? Why is he doing this? And it's that just kind of joy of how your work progresses and how your work is kind of seen by not just the public, but by your family and by the people around you and your loved ones, and kind of talking with your partner, like myself and my partner Joe, like she's a mural painter as well, and talking about our work and how it interacts with the world and how we're inspired and racking our brains emotionally. And it's a wonderful part to it. But like my mum never had that opportunity growing up in the same way. Like she just got married, and then kind of thinking back at those moments, kind of where would she be? Like, could she have been a fashion designer? Could she have been all of these things? And I think it's kind of fascinating and wonderful, and it's part of how kind of the film has kind of come out. And it's weird, like we touched on it earlier on, but weirdly the circle is kind of closing in that, as I said, I'm learning how to sew and learning how to use a sewing machine because I realized the masks weren't actually good enough to me. It was just me wearing a mask rather than me kind of going into full character. So then
when you say good enough, what do you mean?
They were I was just wearing a mask, but I was still wearing my own clothes, and I was still kind of
you want a full transformation.
Well, I want to think about them in an incongruous way, and thinking about how we build ritual, and we build, like, ritual is very important in human interaction, but it was usually built around religion, which has
a handshake, the first thing you do when you meet someone. That's
ritual. Exactly, yeah. And but people who are religious supposedly live longer, and it's not because they're religious; it's because they have a community and they see each other. And
community is a big word there. Community is a huge.
It is. So, like, the work I'm trying to do with the masks is kind of inspired by my mum's dressmaking, inspired by kind of that sense of her and what she could have done, and then going, how can I really push this, and like making like full body costumes, but making them kind of the genesis of it is kind of the ritual of the self, and how instead of making them religious or pagan or linked to tribal elements, being aware of where those tribal and religious and things came from. They came from a genesis of the harvest. They came from the genesis of learning. They came from the genesis of respecting your elders. They came from like remembering the dead, all these things. And they were built up over hundreds of years. And I think we now have an opportunity in a world that's kind of so fractured of kind of creating our own rituals. And that's where I'm kind of going at the work. And you kind of see some of the masks in the film, but I need to now look at them and see where they go with a more interesting story. Like I've just finished one this week, which is kind of the first massive full body piece that I've done, and it's really exciting because it's a new direction that it may go out on the street. Like it has kind of been on the street because it's based on a mural I did donkeys years ago of like me covered in learner stickers. It's an obvious metaphor, but I need to kind of wear my ignorance on my sleeve and realize, I think the older you get, the more you go, oh shit, yeah, I'm completely wrong. I know nothing. And just being able to listen and learn, and like even here, like this is a conversation about my art, but it's also interesting to hear your opinions because I know what's going on in my own head, but it's fascinating listening to other stories, and that's what street art gives you the opportunity to do, is actually to get feedback from people and then go, oh yeah, no, I completely fucking didn't understand that.
If we're talking about these moments of kind of learning, what has changed, or what have you learned through the experience of both making the film and I guess intertwined with that is your mother's diagnosis? How's that impacted you?
I've learned how pervasive it is, how so many families have it. I've learned an awful lot about my dad, and kind of family history, talking to my relations, got closer to some relations as well, just making it and opening up. I've learnt about my mum's past and kind of who she is and what she was, and unfortunately I can't ask her the questions I want to ask her, but because she doesn't remember, or maybe she does remember but can't vocalize it. I think the joy of creativity, whether it's in street art or any other form of creativity, is a sense of questioning what's around you. And that can happen in so many different ways. It can be writing, it can be dance, it can be acting, it can be filmmaking, it can be street art, graffiti, whatever. I see in some of the videos you make, you kind of ask the question, like, what was the who's the greatest artist of all time? And it's like, there isn't, or is there? Like, it's a great question, but it's also like,
I think it works as a question because it evokes a response from just about everyone.
terror.
Well, you have that kind of mix between people that are like, oh, it's Caravaggio. Caravaggio is the greatest artist.
Yeah, there's loads of people say that, don't they?
And then you have the other side of people where they go, that's such a stupid question. Of course there's not a greatest artist. Of course, how can you compare Da Vinci to Banksy? You know, there's no comparison between these people, and stop trying to put this into a box. And it's like, that's the answer.
Exactly.
That's there's no wrong answer to this question.
Yeah, that's what I love about it. It's like, I kind of was like racked with fear going, oh, now I've got to work out who the greatest. And I was like, yeah, there's loads of them. It's just like, and the more you find out about stuff, you're suddenly going, how did I not know about it?
That's the beauty of art, because I'll be like, I'll suddenly learn about, like, I'll be kind of deep into this, and I'll think, I know loads about street art, and then I'll learn about someone like Philip Guston, who did murals in the 1920s, or Francis Ali, who was doing performance art that's so connected into the deepest parts of street art.
Or even like Lee Miller,
nature.
like the story of Lee Miller that is on the Great Women Artists podcast is just amazing. Like, and she'd hidden all her work away from her family and didn't talk about it, but you're suddenly like, fucking hell, I know nothing about her work, and then suddenly you're like thrust into this world,
and you're like, I just want to learn more. And that, look, to be honest, and it's funny that you brought that up. The whole point of that is, one is to get people just talking about art in a way that just makes it more conversational, that we can strip it back from it always being men in suits and big white cubes that get the chance to have these conversations.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, hey, look, this is just fucking two people in the street having a chat, right? That make art accessible, number one. And number two is like, every so often you'll get an artist or someone that'll just be like, this artist, this is the greatest artist, Urs Fischer. And you're like, cool, who the fuck is Urs Fischer? I'm going to go in and look. And suddenly you're like, there's my gateway. So it's not like I'm not tallying them up to see who's the greatest fucking artist. I couldn't care less. To be honest.
Caravaggio comes up a lot.
If we're going on that one, Caravaggio technically at the moment is the greatest artist of all time. I'm not going to argue with that.
It's interesting. You mentioned gatekeepers. Like, a part of the reason street art, I think, exists is because the gatekeepers locked the doors to so many people, and then the revolutionary spirit of a lot of artists, probably mostly in New York and in London, kind of went, fuck that, and just I'm gonna do it my way. And I think that sense of gatekeeper also kind of permeates into the idea of that exhibition in the Hugh Lane, Erase My Memories, which is who chooses what to go into the gallery, and then suddenly as soon as the work goes into the gallery, it's then reverential, and they need to look after it and preserve it. But like, one of the gallery attendants was telling me, like, there was an exhibition on, and the beautiful works on paper by this Irish artist, and he literally arrived in his car with them stacked up in the back seat, like crumpled up, and then arrived in, and then they were like perfectly framing them.
Yeah.
Like, his attitude to it was like, fuck this, I don't care about it.
And you see all the time the way that artists treat their own canvas.
But how you in a gallery, people, you shouldn't touch art, you shouldn't do it, but like,
you don't talk.
You don't talk. You don't laugh. Like, Grayson Perry talks about the humor in art, and I think there's a lot of funny artists out there. I actually think, kind of, even though like Tracy Emin's work is quite visceral and very emotional, she also does have a sense of humor in her work, and I love artists that are able to bridge that gap,
to use humor without in different ways.
Yeah,
you know, it's great seeing someone do like a fucking like larger than life character do a fart or something like that, but you're like, actually, how can humor be played in these scenarios, and this emotion and that interaction between people?
David Shrigley is an amazing artist, but he's greatly respected, but he's maybe respected a little bit less because he's funny. But actually making somebody laugh is a hell of a lot more difficult than it is to make them cry.
Well, and it's not even just visual arts. It's like, you know, how many times has a comedy won Best Oscar? Yeah. I don't think a comedy has ever won Best Oscar. I don't think a comedy actor ever really gets a chance. You know, you look at someone like Steve Carell, he only gets a shot at it when he goes in and does something like Foxcatcher, and then it's like, oh, okay, cool, you can come in and show that you can do these roles. But like you say, to make someone laugh is actually fucking harder than to make someone
I think
cry.
Actually your interview with Swoon was really good. Yourself and Evan interviewed her, because what was amazing was the diverse amount of work that she had done, like everything from making her film to like not doing street art anymore, building a boat, like the inescapable sense that there's so many things that we can do, and we can, and it's also not worrying about like, okay, how are we going to pay for this? Well, get some friends to help out, or like just do it and fail and then try it again. And like, that's what I love. Like I'm making costumes at the moment. I don't know where it's going to go. I've worked on the film, may never make a film again. Like my work ranges from painting, but like I said to a mate, I may not paint again. Like I may just move into photography. Like the work I'm doing now is like transfer technique using acrylic transfer photographs. It's not painting. It uses paint, but it's a photographic experience. I love playing with medium, like maybe doing some ceramics, like building masks, like with paper mache. Like there's so many different techniques, and I love when I see people on the street using something that's out of the norm. Like that is just, you're going, oh wow, like
that's fun. Like
Brad Downey does it an awful lot, and like I think plenty of people know who Brad is, but he's definitely not as well known as a lot of other famous artists. But his work is very, very clever and arresting and intimate and sensitive. Like I met John Fechner. Brad introduced me to John Fechner, and I went out to his house in New York. And like, you're a great advocate for John's work, like. But he was showing me, I don't know if you've ever seen them, he was showing me these casts he made of paper mache casts. Have you seen these?
No.
So he was going out in the streets in the 60s and 70s, and he was finding like burnt out abandoned cars on the street.
Which were everywhere.
And also like street furniture, like a manhole cover. But he'd get paper mache and he'd go into the car and he'd cast the dashboard and then take it out, and he'd have like this reverse dashboard that he had, just like these, effectively like taking the way like you do that as an archaeologist, or you do that as
you do the imprint of the dinosaur foot,
exactly. But he was doing this with like the most banal things that nobody would look at, like a burnt out car. And I was like, fucking hell, John, this is like, it's like, you need to have a retrospective in MoMA.
I mean, that's one of the things with John. It's like you like, and this, I don't want this to be flippant or too candid or something like that, but like, if you're fucking sitting here just now, like, don't wait till he's dead to fucking jump on it. Like,
well, people are advocating. Like Brad is just talks about him to everyone. You and Evan talk about him a lot. People are talking about him for a very good reason, because he was the first person to do a stencil on the street. Yeah. But John was doing it for different reasons. He was doing it politically, like talking about like indigenous tribes and how they were disrespected. The decay piece, like, I think there's a long line of like people being angry in
the 60s in America. You've got the fucking civil rights movement. Look, you can pick any period in American history, and there's anger.
But even like somebody like Rauschenberg was just going out in the street and finding stuff and then coming back in and just sticking it to a canvas. Like talking about like greatest artists of all time, he's probably up there for me as
been given the nod on one of them.
Has he? And he definitely is. People talk about him, and I think the reason he's less famous for a lot of people is because whenever he got into something and kind of got to a point where he was happy with it, he just went, fuck that, move on. Destroyed all of his screens after he won the gold medal at the Venice Biennale. Rang his studio at home and went, destroy all my screens, I've moved on from that. And the studio were like, what? And he was like, no, I've done it, what's next? And that's amazing bravery that you can just do that. But and that whole period of art was really interesting, how it mixed like Merce Cunningham and overlapping between theatre and performance. Like the other thing I'm massively kind of interested in but haven't gone to it an awful lot is dance. Like I went to see Black Dog in the Dublin Dance Festival, but it was like this visceral piece of an hour-long intense movement, and to me, that is just so inherently linked to hip hop culture, but that's where that performance came from. But linked to the street and how like young people express themselves and cultures come out of subtleties of culture. And
I'm kind of, this is going to be such an abstract reference, but maybe someone will get into it. If you've watched any of the latest incarnation of Kendrick's, going back to Kendrick, Kendrick did the live event, brought out the whole of LA, whole of Compton as a celebration of LA culture, Compton. But one of the guys that he brought out was Tommy the Clown. He was, and if you look at the video with Not Like Us, one of the artistic references, this is why Kendrick's so fucking good. One of the artistic references in there is Tommy the Clown, and Tommy the Clown was basically the guy that invented a type of street dance called crumping. And there was a film, the documentary called Rise, I think it was like 2005 or something like that. And you know, it's that exact same thing where it was suddenly dance becomes this vehicle for expression, for movement, for social mobility, to try and build a community, for all these elements. And you know, the whole bringing him out was a nod. Dance's relevance in helping people feel connected, for people feeling that they can express themselves in situations where maybe other doors haven't been opened. And yeah, street art was a vehicle for me to come in and see this. And ever since street art, from looking at stencils, looking at murals and everything like that, and then suddenly I can sit here and talk about Rauschenberg or Caravaggio, and I actually, you know, after fucking 10 years, I don't feel uncomfortable. 10 years ago, that would have scared the living shit out of me. But now, in those spaces, you start to see how that becomes the gateway. And dance is just as valid as any other form of that. But yeah.
Caravaggio, just as you say that, Caravaggio definitely would have been a train bomber. He'd be doing amazing, like, whole cars.
I like that.
But I think what's interesting about people referencing him is, like, you don't expect it in a lot of those pieces. And I was obsessed with him when I lived in Rome for a year, and I was going around photographing graffiti, but I was also following around trying to find every Caravaggio I could possibly find in Italy to see them. And like his influence on lighting and cinema and photography the entire visual world that we live in is built on the shoulders of that realism and the dirt and the grain and the strong angular lighting is like so inherent in so much Western culture. And I think it's really interesting to hear people talk about that. It's very kind of it's wonderful to hear, because it's not like just referencing ourselves. It's like looking outside that, but what are the other influences that we can have? What are the other things that we can dip into? And I think that's where I get a lot of joy out of the community kind of sharing stuff with me and like sharing stories. Like in the on the mural on O'Connell Street, when I put up the matches were kind of a symbol of a life lived, and it wasn't necessarily how much the match was burnt. It wasn't like they lived until they were 80 or they were cut short or it only burnt a little bit. It was like the representation was how much do they live, how much do they impact. Like each match is impacting in a different way. It burnt brighter, it burnt less time, but lot.
Well, you look at like the 27 Club, right?
Yeah, exactly. But what was really interesting was I asked people to send me voice messages to WhatsApp. I just got a burner phone and set it up, and then just got people to send me messages about their family and about COVID, and it was just wonderful. I put 2 or 3 of them online, but that interaction and those stories was way more interesting to me than the physical painting.
A mural, yeah,
and I think that's where we have an opportunity to engage in communities. And like there is a challenge within the world of murals that we are going into communities and we're painting something that is our work, but how much do they actually want it, and how much is it benefiting the community? More often than not it is, because it is brightening up towns and it is making them beautiful, but we have to be aware that
surface level, right? Surface level, I've got a bit of colour. Great. That street looks better. Cool.
And people love it.
Then go beyond that. What am I looking at? What is this? Who is this person? What is this image? And then you go further, and then it's like, okay, cool. What is the knock-on effect of all these murals being here?
But in a lot of communities, when they're done, and they're done as part of either councils or organisations or companies doing them for communities that don't have murals, it is a really good thing. And it's employing artists, it's employing local communities, it's getting them involved in it. And I think I struggle with these things because when I do those sort of collaborative projects, you want to make sure that you're doing them in a way that you're giving them something that they can be really excited about, but you're not losing your direction as an artist. So it's that balance of like helping them express themselves. So it's a very difficult thing to do, and I think anyone who does those collaborative projects with communities is amazing, because they can be tough, but they're very rewarding.
There's always a point where it's like you need someone, a strong independent creative, to come in and say like, actually, when is enough? Because if you leave it all to democratic community process, where everyone's sitting around, you've got the parish church leader, you've got the school head teacher, you've got this person. If you sit in that room long enough, you are going to end up with a stencil of kids holding each other's hands.
I did a project with St. James's Hospital, which was at the kind of the front line of COVID in Ireland, and they have an amazing art collection, which part of their remit as a hospital is not just to fix the body, but also to regenerate the soul as well. So like they're aware that as you're a patient recovering and walking around the corridors, you better actually have something interesting and inspiring to look at. So they fill the corridors with amazing art. It's brilliant. But I worked with a photographer in there and with a really good team. And what was amazing was the photographer took photographs of the staff, and I then created these effectively looking like religious icons on gold panels, but the doors of them were kind of half doors that opened up, so they were the same color as the COVID mask. So you could actually, as a person wandering around, open or close these pieces. But what was wonderful was like the 8 pieces, every single person had a story. Like there was just like from everything from like a consultant to a porter to nurses on the front line, and just interviewing and talking to them about their experience of that time was really interesting, because it wasn't just about the terrible nature of it and how exhausting it was, but also how it brought them together and how making them part of the history of the hospital.
If I supposed to go outside without the mask, I feel like there's a part of me not there.
Not wearing it seems wrong. Do you recognise them? Because I only recognise those people when they were wearing a mask, and you could just recognise them by their eyes.
There's so many projects that can come up and so many exciting things within this world of kind of urban art, street art. I think it's in some ways becoming a beast that is uncontrollable, but there's also kind of a wave of things that are going to come, and I want to get into more performance, I want to get into more building rituals, building costumes, getting people involved in a way that feels as if they have some ownership of it. And the film is kind of bizarre that we did that. I'm still kind of pinching myself that I was able to make it, and fucking hell, like the Arts Council giving us that money was just wonderful. And the support of the arts is actually pretty good in Ireland compared to a lot of other countries. We need way more, but it's a lot better than it is in...
Than it could be.
Well, it's a lot better than it is in other countries, but it still needs. And I think we can look at the arts and kind of go, okay, that's just... is that necessary?
It's the first thing that goes, right?
It often is the first thing that goes, and I think it's misattributed to Churchill. He didn't say it, but like the question was like, what are we fighting for?
Yeah, it's weird that Churchill got lumped with that. It was in the Germans. It was like if they burned the books. Oh fuck! What was? I'll find it. I know the quote you're talking about.
But yeah, like what is it to be human? What is it to be self? And I think the act of vulnerability comes out in art and comes out in literature and film, and that's why people love reality shows like Love Island, because you're actually seeing true, interesting, visceral human interactions, and like high culture and low culture. Like, we come from a culture that was looked at as being the depth of shit, like outsider art and graffiti and street art and lowbrow art and whatever you want to call it, and urban art. And like from the early days of reading Juxtapoz, is this kind of like, holy shit, this person is like absolutely amazing, but galleries didn't give a flying fuck about them. They couldn't care less. And suddenly when they see they've got dollar signs that they can sell something for an invader for £1 million, like there's people stealing them off the walls, and there's a gallery in LA selling like street invader pieces. It's like that sense of like putting value on it. The value of art is in how it interacts with people, and it's only valuable in a monetary way by virtue of somebody going, I want to buy it. But the importance of putting value to it is, to me, is actually that people can create, and it's not about them becoming multimillionaires. It's about them being able to be a voice that can connect with people, be a voice that can start conversations, be a voice that can, like, after the film, people coming up to us and like talking about their parents. Mark from who runs Hook Blog, he's a good friend of mine, and his mum came up and talked to me after the film about their experience of it, and it was just like, there's so many different things that are conversations that are happening that is just so rewarding and bizarre and amazing, and the questions you don't ask yourself to suddenly, like, even in this, like, my mind is now racing with loads of ideas. It's just really inspiring to talk to people and to hear their stories.
And I think that lies at the heart of what a lot of us want to do with our professions or our art or our creativity. We want to hear stories, share stories, tell stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what got me into this world. Like, in some ways I feel a little bit like an imposter, because like, we all do.
Every single one of us does.
It's a little bit of a cliche, but like, I don't do it, never did a huge amount on the street, and I take quite a while to do the work that I do. I kind of maybe think about it a bit too much. When I see the amount of work that people put in and artists that are making a career out of it, it's wonderful to see how hard they work and how much they put their ass on the line, and you just have to keep making and keep making and keep making. And bizarrely, the work that you don't expect to be connecting is sometimes, you're like, oh, this is okay, and then suddenly people jump on it and you're like, fuck.
Yeah.
And the stuff you think is going to be like totally like people are going to really connect to this, you're going to be like, oh,
this is the one, I'm so fucking, and you're like, Jesus.
Every musician says it about like the hit single off the album or the book that
was why Nirvana wrote Smells Like Teen Spirit. It was supposed to be the whole point. I'm starting another podcast here. The whole point of Smells Like Teen Spirit was it was almost like a big poke at how dumb the audiences were.
But that was a punk. What's the name of the woman? I think she died recently. Who was part of a punk band. Who was part of the whole. I'm going to make a tit of myself trying to remember this. I was reading an article about it a couple of weeks ago, and she I think she wrote "Smells Like Teen Spirit" on a wall.
Oh, is it?
So it was her who actually came up with the line, and gave pretty much gave it to Nirvana.
Yeah, okay. I didn't know about that.
I didn't know about it at all. It was just like, but yeah, growing up as a kid, like listening to that album, like that's where my kind of artistic direction probably started, with like that sort of music. And in some ways, that early days of kind of indie music where you had to like literally sit recording shit on your tape recorder in the 80s and 90s, I'm that old, and like trying to find music, and nobody had any idea what stuff was, and listening to Conor Harrington talking about like Source magazine and trying to find like a page of stuff, like it was amazing.
I just want to finish with just kind of going back to your experiences with the film, with your mother. What advice could you give to somebody that is either in a similar position to you, curious about, maybe they are a similar position, or further down the line? How have you found support? How have you found a way to deal with it, to mentally take it all on?
The more you talk to people, the better. Yeah. The more you open up and share, because asking for help is really fucking difficult and people don't like doing it, but it's not necessarily just asking for help, it's just having that conversation. My dad wanted to make the film because he felt when you talk about Alzheimer's with other people, they suddenly clam up because they've no idea how to talk about it. Like bizarrely, at one stage about 4 years ago, he turned around to me and said, "I wish your mum had cancer." And I was like, "What?" But his point was really interesting, because it was like, people know how to react to it. It was like, "Are you getting chemo? Is it?
They can go practical.
Is it in remission?" But Alzheimer's is staring into the face of an abyss, and I think it terrifies people, because the only thing we have are our memories. So the conversations are really hard. My dad wanted to make the film so we could have a conversation. There are Alzheimer's societies all around the world. There's lots of information online. There's so much out there that is wonderful that we can have those conversations. And it's about going to therapy. It's about asking for help. It's about caring for each other and having time to care, and being able to support people who are the carers. And I try and do as much as I can, but I can always do more. So I think anyone who is feeling in that situation, reach out, DM me, talk about it. I'll point you in the direction of things. I'll share an experience. I'm happy to talk about it, and happy to share those things, because the one thing that's actually interesting is the more you talk about it, it's not just the morose part of it, but it's also about the levity and the hope and the memories of a person, and capturing them, because when somebody dies unexpectedly, you can't ask those questions of other people, and it just kind of, the timescale of it, of Alzheimer's, does give you an opportunity in a weird way to talk about your family and these things in a different pace. It's not necessarily a good thing, but it's a different thing, and something is going to get us all in some way.
Yeah.
So
something got to kill us.
so it's the nature of confronting death is far more probably pervasive in Irish society. We are, and Celtic societies, I think, deal with death in a far more sense of longevity and life and reflecting. So that the Irish wake is all about laughter and enjoyment, because you're celebrating a life. And I think there's lots of communities around the world. So to me, it's actually about the celebration of my mum's life, the celebration of everything she did, the celebration of the woman she is and was, and the love story of my mum and dad, like the little details, the crosswords, the way my dad talks about her is just so wonderful. Like, he is the love of his life, and he's devoted to her, and it's so wonderful, and that's the important part of their relationship and what they've made of their life. So anyone going through that, it's a time for reflection, but also time to talk to other people and ask for help.
Thank you once again to Asbestos for giving us the space to just open up that conversation, and I think there's so much that we can take from that general outlook on how we approach whatever it is that we're going through in our lives. You can follow Asbestos on Instagram at Art of Asbestos. That's the way to stay on top of any release dates for the film. We've already recorded the next wave of episodes, so they are going to be coming out thick and fast. We obviously covered a lot of ground in this one, so please do let us know your thoughts and comments on any of the subjects that we've touched on in this episode over on Instagram at Radio Juxtapoz. We will be back with you all real soon. Till that moment comes, take care of yourselves and each other.